my First Step Ever podcast, and I am Ishani Nigam, your host and producer of the podcast. This podcast is made for all the disruptors around the globe who know that they are made for something, for that one thing, but fear of embarrassment, fear of rejection, the fear of fear itself holds us back at some point in time. But hey, those are the only milestones that if we cross, we are there to take our first steps. So, welcome on this journey with me where I interview people from across the globe so that they can share their story, their challenges, and you know that even you can surpass yours. Well, what are you waiting for? Let's get started. Hey, welcome back on my First Step Ever. This is another episode with another gem on this episode to share her story, her amazing creative story that she has taken so that you can take your journey. And I know when we really want to create something, we really want to follow our passion or the desire, the goal, or the dream that seems impossible, there are many hurdles. And that is why taking the first step is the hardest. So, we have our amazing guest speaker today, Jean Kropper, all the way from Australia. Hi, Jean. This is Ishani on my First Step Ever welcoming you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
So, for my audiences, I'd like you to know that Jean is an internationally published author of 3 books, which has sold more than 30,000 copies altogether. Wow, that is a really huge win. And she has taught purpose-driven art workshops, which make mindfulness accessible to a wide audience for over 25 years in the USA, Canada, and Australia. Wow, that's a wide range or globally. I like to also say that she shares her skills through workshops to help others lower their stress levels, create a happier brain. Wow, I would love to understand more about that and tell their own stories through meditative drawing, paper crafts, and art journaling. Wow, I think this is a very creative way of releasing the pain, releasing the stress, releasing the tension that we have. And we see that you have mastered it, Jean. Before we come to this stage, how you accomplished this extremely unique way of dealing with oneself and the stress, I would like to know and go a little back to your childhood days. That please tell a little bit about the Jean that you were then, and what was the mindset, the people that you grew up with?
My father was an engineer, and my grandfathers and great-grandfathers were all engineers. So there was a sense of independence and curiosity, and that you could learn how to do most things, that you could solve problems. My father wasn't traditional. He taught me how to use a bandsaw and do woodwork at 10. And he taught me how to do electronics when I was 11 and 12 and bought me all sorts of kits to make buzzers and clocks and things like that. So I was unusual in that. My father didn't treat me just as girl things, girls doing girl things. Yeah, he expected me to be able to learn unusual things. We made candles together. We built tables together. Yeah, so that was, I thought that was normal. But there was a sense of respect and trust that was lovely. And my mother was very good at planning and would give us boxes of cardboard and paper and tape and glue and, allowed us to get dirty and build things. And so it was sort of a very practical household. We moved around a lot. My dad was an engineer, as I said. And we lived in the United States till I was 5. Then we moved to Scotland for almost 5 years. And then we moved back to the United States. And I was often the odd one out. That was hard, but also good. It was hard in that I often had a different accent than other kids. I thought differently than other kids. When I moved back to the United States, I was teased because I had a Scottish accent. They thought I was very weird. But there was good stuff in that too, because I had to trust in myself. And I had to decide that I was okay and that it wasn't that other people were wrong, but their point of view in the world was different. And since I'd had an experience of living in different countries quite young, I knew there were lots of different ways to live and lots of different ways to see the world. So I guess that gave me a broader perspective than other kids.
Very colorful, very innovative. I think you had a very wholesome upbringing, if I can say so. As you talk about your dad, your mom, and the whole opportunity of, actually traveling to different places, meeting different people, that helped you build that sensitivity around, for people, to kind of give them a space to speak and for you to listen and understand. So I see that was brewing very long before anyone, generally can start understanding all these things in your case. And Jean, I think it's really nice that you've mentioned that how you were facing different challenges and how you could overcome, because a lot of people around the world, the youth or anyone in whatever space of life they are, we are kind of teased, bullied, and labeled with a lot of things, because people are not very confident of who they are, and they feel like doing this to the other people would help them look good, be good. So for people who do face this, as you just mentioned, that you did face a bit of that at one point in time, and you've also told us that you look at the positive points, that what you learned out of it. But I like to dig a little deep over here before we move ahead, because for the sake of people who are in that boat right now and not able to kind of get out of that, how did you tackle that situation when you were, labeled, called different names, or you were like teased, although you had a very strong upbringing? How did you tackle that at that age with your own set of beliefs that you had?
I guess I was very shy, so I did withdraw a lot. Didn't speak out much because I was teased for my accent when I came back to the United States. And after that, we moved to Ireland. That was actually easier. It was always easier to be overseas because when I was overseas, anything I did differently, they'd say, "Oh, she's American."
Get away with that.
Anything I did differently, it's like, "Oh, she's American. That's why." Oh, yeah. But it forgave a lot of things and left me room to be whoever I was. Well, whenever I was living in the United States, it's like, well, she's American. She's supposed to fit in. She's supposed to be the same as everyone else. And I wasn't. And so I felt more comfortable overseas, even though there was a certain grief in not fitting in or being accepted the same way in the United States. I could do it as an adult, but as a child, that was quite difficult. And when I went to boarding school in the United States for high school, there was, people kept telling me to join the Foreign Student Club, and I probably should have. I would have been happier there. But I was just like, but I'm American. Leave me alone. So some of it was just being a bit separate. Having parents who I knew loved me and just supported me being me helped. And also, I suppose I found friends who were a bit different in all sorts of ways. So we found our own little tribe and managed. So that wasn't comfortable or easy, but I guess finding your own way. And if you've got a few friends, you can get through just about anything.
Absolutely right. I completely agree with that. I think it's a lot to do with the people that you surround yourself with, and it really sort of reflects in your thinking, behavior as well. So, Jean, as you were mentioning about the environment that really helped you, just be the G that you are. Now that you are working in a profession where you are helping people relieve stress and in a very creative manner, and I would say that is a thought of a disruptor as well, as we are dealing with this theme, the disruptors around the world. So how did you arrive at this decision? So before you took the first step of entering into the industry, what was happening in that phase that led you to make a start over here? What was that?
First of all, I worked in graphics and advertising in my 20s and early 30s. And I came out to Australia as a backpacker. I traveled around the world and alone and came to Australia. I married an Australian and we lived in Sydney. But in the 90s, the graphics and advertising industry collapsed because the industry changed. New technology came in, and suddenly there was desktop publishing, there was Apple Macintosh. So the whole industry kind of collapsed. And I had 3 employers go bankrupt, one after another. So it was quite devastating because suddenly I lost my job, but then the whole industry just sort of wasn't there for a while in a point of change. So I started teaching art workshops. I'd always wanted to do art, but wasn't sure where to begin. And since everything else fell apart, well, I thought, well, I might as well do it now.
That's a good decision and a way of thinking.
So I started doing art workshop and selling art through galleries. And then about a year later, I started teaching art workshops. Yeah, it was probably a year after that. I had an art exhibition and a publisher came to me and said, do you want to write a book? My first book was on how to recycle paper at home and how to make paper from, or artwork from paper, handmade paper. So I did that. I hadn't written a book. I was terrified. Could I write a book? So the first step into teaching art was because a whole bunch of things fell apart. So it was an exploration. It was scary. I didn't know how to teach art. I didn't know the gallery system. I didn't know how to write a book. I didn't know about publishing. So there was a lot of learning. And over many years, I've taught art and different kinds of art, hand paper making, hand book binding, mask making, using paper to make sculpture in 3 dimensions. So lots of different ways of helping people tell stories using paper.
That's very interesting. I know that, Jean, you have another step that you're going to mention, but just before we reach there, I want to kind of ask a follow-up question over here because we are here right now. When you now we have a high level of idea of where you reached before you took your first step of writing the book, as you mentioned. What was the top most challenging thing for you in this phase, to reach here that it just, made you think way too many times and you somehow overcame that challenge? Because people who are listening to us, they are in that phase who are yet not there to take the first step. A lot of back and forth happens. So for you to be here, to have that teaching experience and all that, in that phase, what was your biggest challenge and how did you overcome that?
Fear and excitement are 2 sides of the same coin. So when I was afraid, also realizing that was also exciting, because I do like a certain amount of change and learning new things, but sometimes the balance can tip towards fear, but also looking at fear and saying, what if that is exciting? Maybe we can pretend this is exciting and dive into that side instead of the fear side, so you don't get immobilized. Also going from curiosity and saying, okay, how do you write a book? How do publishers work? How are books marketed? How would I need to organize myself to write a whole book? What would I put in it? So I guess going from curiosity took me a little while, but in my 20s, I realized that if you pretended to know what you were doing, no one could help you. If you're trying to be cool, no one's going to help you because you said you knew what you were doing. But if you are willing to be vulnerable enough to ask questions, people can help you and teach you things.
Wow.
So if you, instead of trying to be cool, which is attractive, if you can relax and sort of say, okay, I need to learn about something, how to write a book or how to sell artwork in a gallery. If you can be vulnerable enough to just ask and say, well, can you give me some advice? Then people can help you. And often if you ask people around you or tell them what you're doing, you may find there are more people around you who can help than you realized. There may be other people who've actually written books that you never asked. And I found that was true. So yeah, be vulnerable and ask questions is certainly a lesson.
I think that's a golden advice because we never ever look from that point of view. Because I think when we are in our 20s, And when we really want to get out there, and especially at this time, where there is so many people out there trying to put their voice, the brand out in the world, we need to show, we have that urgent need to, show to the people that what have we got, and that what we are really good at, because that's what the employers, or maybe the people are looking at, that what are you good at, what can you help them with. But this is a very good piece of advice to also accept that you are still in the learning procedure, and if you do not show that side of yours, as Jean said, that you will be taken for granted of knowing things and performing to that capacity. And if you're really not there, it's going to be very difficult to make up. Also, because 20s is a very, very safe space to experiment, to fail, to learn. Not that you can't going forward in the life, but it's a very good start, I would say. So, Jean, thank you so much for allowing me to, kind of butt in and ask you a few questions. Would love to hear then what happened.
But once I had a child, I couldn't travel to teach. And I'd always enjoyed traveling to teach because it gave me a way of being somewhere new and getting to know the people who were there. Whether I was teaching in Montreal in a French speaking gallery, or international kids in a private school in Boston, Massachusetts, or San Diego, or around Australia. I taught on Aboriginal reserves in Northern Territory. So it was a way of meeting lots of people. But when my son was little, I couldn't travel. My husband didn't want to change his work schedule so that I could leave. But I came back to teaching again later, after my son had grown up a bit more. My husband had a pretty rough family. It wasn't healthy. And he had a lot of family trauma. He had a father who was a violent alcoholic and had a lot of things that were hidden in his family. And we were together for 19 years. But towards the end of that, he became an alcoholic and had a breakdown. And then he became very volatile. And so my son and I moved out of our home to get away from him. We went through some rough times. Eventually, my son and I developed post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD. So we had some really rough times. And then there was a point I realized I needed to do some healing. And we've spent probably about 7 or 8 years putting ourselves back together. As part of that healing, I work with many different practitioners as part of that. Craniosacral therapists, acupuncturists, massage therapists, counselors, trauma release exercise people, lots of different healing practices. When I started teaching art workshops again as my son got older, I realized that I could bring in a lot of the healing practices or the insights from healing and combine them with my art and my art teaching so that there was a richer level. It was teaching creative skills, but also allowing people to have some ways of dealing with strong emotion, of self-regulating, of stress, of if you're depressed or anxious, that I'd learned a lot of skills from my healing process to bring into the art workshops. And so I sort of combined the insights from my healing and the art skills to create the meditative drawing workshops.
Jean, I acknowledge efforts that you have put in through your journey. And to arrive at this stage, you have seen a lot, you have experienced a lot, to say so. And there are certain perceived challenges that we know would come in a professional journey, in a personal journey. But then there are certain, uncertain challenges that you would have not really anticipated or thought of. But how beautiful it is that whatever pain or the challenge that you have gone through, you have found something beautiful in that, and you're not just only helping yourself and your family lead a better life, but you're taking the learning and you're trying to impact other people's life as well in a very, very, very creative way, I would say. So thank you for actually showing us that how you can take blessings out of the different challenging situations, learning and turn into something that can really help you, because life is all about the ups and the downs. And once you embrace it, you will definitely come, really emerge strong out of it. So thank you so much, Jean, because everyone who's listening to us, they are in a journey of their own, and it is a very unpredictable journey. So there are very important lessons to learn from your life. So Jean, thank you so much for taking us through your childhood to your 20s, and then to the place where you reached, where you started healing people in a creative manner. So what I would like to know now, that at this point in time where you have already taken your first step, do you still have some challenges in the professional career? And if yes, how do you tackle them?
When COVID hit and Australia was locked down for months, I couldn't teach in person. So all my in person teaching was canceled. And I panicked for a week and a half or 2 weeks.
Very natural feeling.
And then I thought, okay, it's time to put art workshops online, that it has to become something different. So I taught myself how to shoot video. I taught myself how to edit video. I taught for 10 weeks online for free just to learn. I made contact with some arts groups in the United States and did some workshops and just learned how to teach online. And it was frightening. I didn't have any income, but I just thought, if I learn how to teach online, I've got a whole new market, a whole new industry. So yeah, I just decided to learn all the technology and to keep going, because often, technology is going to change. The world is going to change. Your industry is going to change. Sometimes you need to plow forward, even though you don't quite know where you're going or quite how you're getting there. Gradually, the world opened up in that I started meeting all these amazing international students, making different connections. I started teaching collaborative workshops with people in India and different parts of Australia. I just spoke to somebody today from France who wants me to run a workshop with them. And so I guess often in the hardest times, something good comes out of it if you can hang in there and leave room for the positive. I mean, now I look back on my husband and I realized I can't blame him, because a lot of bad things happened to him that caused him to do what he was doing. So I guess stepping back from blame to understand the bigger picture. Also, if a challenge is in front of you, often you can't go back. So give yourself some time to collapse and cry or get upset or whatever you do for that. Talk to your girlfriends, but then pick yourself up and just sort of say, what can I do? And try to figure out a way forward. Yeah, I guess I found that there's usually a way forward, and it's a new adventure. You have to just go with it. Yeah, dive into the excitement instead of the fear.
Jean, you have a great attitude towards life. And if I can summarize that, what you just mentioned, having a vision when things change, when your external environment change, you had a vision, you had an understanding, you were willing to learn to, get to the other end of the river, if to say so, so you understood what the challenge was and where you wanted to get and what was needed to get to the other side. You were willing to do that. You had your fear, you were facing your fears, you were doing it while you knew that what is at stake, but you had the belief that if I do this and this, I can be at the other side and then things can improve. So putting all these things in a context for our listeners today, that whatever situation you are in, if you're able to, apply these few steps, or the whole thought process and the positive attitude of, making things happen for yourself, I'm sure that whatever you're thinking of, what your aim is, goal is, you will be one step ahead. So Jean, thank you so much for taking us through that journey of yours. And it's never ever easy to open up about yourself, your personal life, but doing that helps so many of us feel that we are all the same at the very core, whatever problems that we are dealing with, but we can always go past it. So thank you, Jean. And for anyone who has probably heard this for the first time, the work that you do, the workshop that you do, if you would like to maybe help us understand that what is this workshop they look like. So if someone is interested in this profession or would like to experience the workshop, what they can expect out of it.
Yeah, the meditative drawing workshop, it's very simple drawing, and I teach that online. And so I shoot a video ahead of time showing the drawing. And each time there's an artistic prompt. So there's a worksheet with some specific kinds of drawing that you can do. It's mark making or doodling. It's not complicated drawing. I talk people through it, and I bring people together in a group online, and we all draw together for 45 minutes. And so it's really relaxed. And at the beginning, we start with a breathwork exercise that's maybe 5 minutes. So it quiets the brain down, calms the nervous system, and also gives you a breathwork technique that you can use for yourself at home. So if you deal with anxiety or raging thoughts, it's a technique to just quiet yourself down. Then we go into the drawing, we do the drawing. And so it's something that's very accessible, it's fun, and it's sort of teaching mindfulness and creative skills, but in a really easy way. We just work with markers on photocopy paper, nothing complicated, nothing expensive, but also it's using art as a way of relaxing. So it gives you something to focus on, so you forget the whole world, forget all the things that are going on, and you just get to focus on some really simple drawing.
So anyone who resonates with that, would like to probably explore this career option, or who would like to explore this as an attendee, I will definitely leave Jean's LinkedIn link in the show notes below. And now that we are very close to wrapping up this episode, before we take your leave, Jean, I always request my guest speakers to leave our listeners with a quote or a saying that resonates with them.
This was actually from a book by the man who started Pixar.
Oh, wow.
Ed Catmull. And he says, the antidote to fear is trust. And we all have a desire to find something to trust in an uncertain world. Fear and trust are powerful forces, and while they're not opposites exactly, trust is the best tool for driving out fear. There will always be plenty to be afraid of, especially when you're doing something new. Trusting others doesn't mean that you won't make mistakes. It means that if they do, or if you do, you trust that they'll act to help solve it. Fear can be created quickly, but trust can't.
Wow, that was
fear and excitement that, they're a bit of a balance.
Thank you so much, Jean. Thank you for being on my first step ever. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Oh, well, likewise. I've enjoyed talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And for all the listeners, stay tuned for the upcoming episode so that you can take that one step towards your journey a lot sooner. If you're still glued together on this episode, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And if you really want to hear more such stories from around the globe, then subscribe to my First Step Ever podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google, and Spotify, whichever platform you prefer. Please do give ratings and please do write your comments. And you can directly reach out to me on my First Step Ever _IN. That's my Instagram handle. A little about myself. I have always loved performing on stage, acting, speaking, and just emoting myself. So I use these mediums different ways so that I can connect with people, help them, empower them, infotain them, which is to inform them and entertain them. If you would like to collaborate for any opportunities, more than welcome to connect with me on my Instagram handle. Thank you.